Let me ask you a question that might make you uncomfortable. When was the last time you failed so hard it shook your identity? Not the polite kind of failure, not the Instagram-friendly, lesson learned. I'm talking about the kind of failure that punches you in the gut, the kind that makes you question your worth, your future, your certainty about who you are. Because here's the truth most people will never tell you. Failure is not what breaks people. What breaks people is the meaning they attach to it. Two people fail in the exact same way. One uses it as fuel and becomes unstoppable. The other uses it as proof and slowly disappears. Same event, different meaning, different destiny. And today, if you're willing, you're going to learn how to stop letting failure define you and start letting it drive you forward with a force so powerful that nothing can stop you. Most people are not afraid of failure. They are afraid of what failure means about them. They fail at a business and suddenly they're bad with money. They fail in a relationship and suddenly they're unlovable. They fail publicly and suddenly they believe they're exposed. But failure has no meaning of its own. Zero. It's neutral, silent, empty. You are the one who gives it power. Think about it. A child learning to walk falls down hundreds of times. Do they stop and say, maybe walking isn't for me? No. They fall, they adjust, they try again. Why? Because they have an attached identity to the fall. But somewhere along the way, society trains us to confuse performance with worth. So when performance drops, worth collapses. Here's the shift that changes everything. Failure is feedback, not punishment, not proof, feedback. And feedback is gold. If you're strong enough to listen instead of defend, every failure is answering a question you asked the universe. You tried something, reality responded. The only real failure is refusing to read the message. People who win at the highest level don't avoid failure. They fail faster, smarter, and with less emotional drama. They extract the lesson, adjust their strategy, and move forward without poisoning their identity. But most people don't do that. They relive the failure. They rehearse it. They emotionally re-experience it again and again, and each time they wire it deeper into their nervous system. And then they wonder why they hesitate next time. Let me tell you something that can change your life if you let it sink in. Your nervous system doesn't respond to logic. It responds to meaning and emotion. If failure means I'm not enough, your body will shut down. If failure means I'm learning, your body will mobilize. Same event, different biochemical response, different future. The most successful people on earth have trained themselves to associate failure with growth instead of pain. And the way they do it is simple, but not easy. They consciously interrupt the old meaning and replace it with a better one, immediately. They ask better questions. Instead of why does this always happen to me, they ask what is this trying to teach me right now? Instead of what's wrong with me, they ask what needs to be refined. Questions shape focus. Focus shapes emotion. Emotion shapes action. This is not philosophy. This is how the brain works. When you fail and immediately frame it as feedback, you stay in motion. Momentum stays alive. Confidence doesn't collapse because your identity isn't tied to the outcome. It's tied to growth. And here's the real secret most people miss. Failure only hurts when you believe it was wasted. When you extract the lesson, the pain transforms into power. You stop fearing failure because you realize it cannot take anything from you. It can only add information. And information, applied repeatedly, becomes mastery. So if you failed, good. If you've fallen, perfect. If life knocked you flat, that means you were moving. The question is not whether you will fail again. The question is whether you will use it as a prison or a platform. Because once you stop asking failure to protect your ego and start asking it to educate your mind, you become unstoppable. And from that moment on, you don't fall backward anymore. You fail forward. Most people don't fail because they lack talent, intelligence, or opportunity. They fail because their identity is too small to survive a setback. Here's what I mean. Your life will always rise or fall to the level of the identity you protect. If your identity is, I'm successful when I win, then the moment you lose, your nervous system panics. If your identity is, I'm confident when people approve, then the moment they criticize, you shrink. If your identity is, I'm worthy when things work out, then one failure feels like an existential threat. That's not weakness. That's conditioning. From a young age, we're trained to link who we are to what we produce. Grades, results, praise, titles, money, applause. And slowly, without realizing it, we build an identity that's fragile because it's dependent on outcomes we don't fully control. So when failure shows up, it doesn't just hurt, it attacks the self. And the brain is wired to protect identity at all costs. That's why people quit right before breakthroughs. That's why people sabotage success. That's why people stay stuck in they're not afraid of pain. They're afraid of ego death. But the highest performers on earth play a different game. They build an identity that is larger than any single outcome. They don't say, I am my results. They say, I am the kind of person who figures it out. They don't say, I failed. They say, that strategy failed. I didn't. And that distinction changes everything. Because when your identity is rooted in growth, standards, and values, failure can no longer threaten you. It can only inform you. Think about this. If your identity is, I am a learner, then mistakes are not humiliating. They're expected. If your identity is, I am resilient, then setbacks don't discourage you. They activate you. If your identity is, I finish what I start, then temporary defeat doesn't stop you. It sharpens you. This is why identity is the real game. You will always act in alignment with who you believe you are, even when it hurts you. So if you believe, I'm the kind of person who gives up when it gets hard, your behavior will obey that belief. If you believe I'm the kind of person who rises under pressure, your nervous system will mobilize under stress instead of collapse. That's not motivation, that's self-concept. And here's the shift that frees people instantly. You are not your performance, you are the one producing the performance. The performer can stumble, the producer learns and adjusts. When you separate identity from outcome, you unlock emotional agility. You stop spiraling after failure. You stop making setbacks mean something permanent. You recover faster, and speed of recovery is everything. Success is not about avoiding pain. It's about shortening the time between falling down and standing back up with clarity. The strongest people you admire are not fearless. They're identity secure. Their sense of self doesn't collapse when life tests them. It expands. And this is where real confidence comes from. Not from certainty that you'll win, but from certainty that you can handle whatever happens. When your identity is bigger than the moment, you stop negotiating with fear. You stop asking, what if I fail? And start asking, who do I choose to be right now? And that choice, repeated consistently, rewires your destiny. Because the moment you stop asking failure to validate your worth, the moment you stop letting outcomes define your identity, you become dangerous in the best possible way. Failure can't stop you. Criticism can't shrink you. Rejection can't break you. Why? Because you know who you are, and you know it's bigger than this moment. And when identity is solid, momentum becomes inevitable. Most people think momentum comes from circumstances. It doesn't. Momentum comes from emotion. 2P. People can be in the exact same situation, same failure, same loss, same setback, and one explodes forward while the other shuts down completely. The difference is not intelligence, not resources, not luck. It's emotional state. Your brain does not move you toward what is logical. It moves you toward what feels compelling. And when emotion collapses, action disappears. When emotion is elevated, obstacles shrink. This is why failure feels so dangerous to most people. It doesn't just slow them down. It hijacks their emotional state. Shame, frustration, self-doubt, anger turned inward. And once emotion drops below a certain threshold, momentum dies. Here's the truth most people never learn. You do not experience life as it is. You experience life as you feel, and feelings are not random. They are created by focus, meaning, and physiology. When people fail, their focus narrows. They obsess over what went wrong, what people will think, what it says about them. Their body tightens, breathing becomes shallow, shoulders drop, energy collapses. And then they call that state reality. But it's not reality, it's chemistry. High performers don't wait for emotion to change before they act. They change emotion to change action. They understand that momentum is an emotional habit. You don't get motivated and then move. You move and motivation follows. You shift your body, your breathing, your posture, your focus, and emotion responds instantly. This is why two people can fail and respond opposite ways. One goes home and replays the story of defeat until their nervous system learns helplessness. The other interrupts the pattern, changes state, and immediately look for the next move. Same failure, different emotional conditioning. And here's the breakthrough. Emotion is trainable, just like muscles. If every time you fail, you associate it with pain, your body will resist risk. But if every time you fail, you condition yourself to feel curiosity, determination, and even excitement, failure becomes a trigger for momentum instead of paralysis. This is not positive thinking. This is deliberate emotional conditioning. Your brain links experiences with feelings. Change the feeling and you change the future response. That's why the best performers in the world don't just ask what happened. They ask, what state do I need to be in to win next? They don't indulge emotional collapse. They don't dramatize setbacks. They don't camp in disappointment. They recover fast. And speed of emotional recovery is the real edge, because life will hit you again and again. The question is how long you stay down. Most people bleed energy after failure. They withdraw, they hesitate, they wait to feel ready. But readiness is a feeling, and feelings follow action, not the other way around. Momentum is built when you decide to act from power before you feel powerful. And here's the most important part. Emotion always follows meaning. If failure means I'm stuck, you feel trapped. If failure means I'm being redirected, you feel alive. If failure means this is happening for me, energy returns. You don't need more time. You don't need more confidence. You need a new emotional pattern. The moment you take control of your emotional state, circumstances lose their power over you. You stop being reactive. You become directive. And that's when momentum becomes unstoppable. Because momentum is not about speed, it's about direction plus energy. And when emotion is aligned with purpose, even failure pushes you forward. So the next time you fall, don't ask, why did this happen? Ask, what emotion will I choose right now? Because the emotion you choose in the face of setback determines whether this moment becomes a wall or a launch pad. And once you master that, nothing can slow you down for long. Most people think mastery comes from talent. It doesn't. Mastery comes from repetition after failure. What separates winners from everyone else is not that they succeed more often. It's that they're willing to fail longer without quitting. They stay in the game past the point where most people emotionally exit. And that's where repetition changes everything. Every skill you admire, confidence, leadership, wealth, communication, influence, was built through repeated failure, awkward starts, missed shots, rejections, embarrassing moments, small losses stacked over time. But here's where most people get it wrong. They repeat failure without refinement. They relive mistakes instead of redesigning behavior. Repetition alone doesn't create mastery. Intelligent repetition does. High performers don't just try again. They adjust. They observe. They isolate what worked, what didn't, and what to do differently next time. Failure becomes a laboratory, not a courtroom. This is why amateurs practice until they get it right. Professionals practice until they can't get it wrong. And that level of certainty only comes from repeated exposure to discomfort. Your brain resists unfamiliar pain. But when you eat an action enough times, even failure becomes familiar. And familiarity kills fear. The first time you fail publicly, it feels like death. The 10th time, it feels inconvenient. The 100th time, it feels instructional. That's conditioning. Every repetition rewires your nervous system. You stop reacting emotionally. You start responding strategically. And this is why most people stay stuck at almost good. They avoid repetition, because repetition exposes weakness. They want confidence before they practice, not realizing confidence is the result of practice. Repetition builds identity. Identity builds certainty. Certainty builds momentum. You don't wake up fearless. You earn it through exposure. This is why people who succeed quickly sometimes fail permanently. They didn't build repetition tolerance. The moment things got hard, they lacked the emotional muscle to stay engaged. But people who struggle longer, they build depth, they build resilience, they build adaptability, and eventually they become unstoppable, not because they're perfect, but because nothing rattles them anymore. Repetition also does something else. Most people underestimate it removes ego. When you fail repeatedly, you stop trying to look good. You start trying to get good. And that shift is everything. Ego wants approval. Mastery wants results. The moment you prioritize growth over image, learning accelerates. You stop personalizing mistakes. You stop defending failure. You stop quitting prematurely. And suddenly what used to intimidate you becomes automatic. Here's the real secret. Repetition creates trust in yourself, not hype, not affirmations, not external validation. Rust. You know you can handle pressure because you've been there before. You know you can recover because you've done it repeatedly. You know you can win because you've survived losing. And when you trust yourself, hesitation disappears. People don't lack ability, they lack self-trust. And self-trust is built by keeping promises to yourself through repetition, even when results are delayed. This is why mastery looks boring from the outside. Same actions, same discipline, same effort, again and again, but inside, it's transformational. Because repetition turns chaos into clarity, uncertainty into confidence, failure into fluency. So if you've been failing in the same area of your life, don't ask what's wrong with me. Ask what am I repeating without refining. Because the moment you refine the repetition, momentum explodes. And once repetition turns into mastery, failure loses its power. Most people think failure is something that happens to them. It's not. Failure is something you choose to let define you, or something you choose to use as fuel. This is the essence of failing forward. It's a decision, not a personality trait. You can fail once and give up, and then failure defines you forever. Or you can fail 1,000 times and grow unstoppable. Because failure never defines the person who decides it won't. Here's the truth few people understand. Your life is a reflection of the decisions you make under pressure, not the circumstances you face, not the mistakes you make, the decision to keep going, the decision to interpret failure as information instead of indictment. When you adopt failure forward as a lifestyle, you stop resisting discomfort. You stop fearing embarrassment. You stop avoiding risk. You start experimenting. You start iterating. You start creating momentum that no obstacle can stop, because failing forward is not about doing things perfectly. It's about taking massive action, learning fast, and adjusting relentlessly. Every setback becomes a stepping stone. Every mistake becomes a map. Every no becomes a compass pointing toward yes. And here's the secret that separates the average from the extraordinary. It's not talent, luck, or timing. It's the habit of interpreting failure differently than everyone else. Ordinary people react. Extraordinary people respond. Ordinary people retreat. Extraordinary people repurpose. Ordinary people blame. Extraordinary people ask, what now? This is why people who embrace failing forward develop unstoppable momentum, because they have broken the old contract with fear, doubt, and ego, because their identity is bigger than any single outcome, because their emotions are tools, not tyrants, because they trust themselves to recover, adjust, and rise every single time. And here's the bottom line. The world will not protect you from failure. It will not wait for you to feel ready. It will hit you hard again and again. The only protection you have is your mindset. The only way to leverage failure is to decide it is fuel, not a sentence. So the question is not whether you will fail. The question is whether you will let failure make you smaller, or whether you will fail forward and become unstoppable. Once you make that decision, once you commit to seeing failure as your ally instead of your enemy, momentum becomes inevitable. Setbacks become setups. Losses become lessons, and nothing, no circumstance, no opinion, no obstacle can stop you from moving forward. Because failing forward is not a strategy. It's not a tactic. It's a way of being. And once you embrace it, the word failure itself disappears from your vocabulary. All that remains is movement, growth, power, and unstoppable momentum.